A millionaire falls to the ground, gasping for air, on the verge of death. No one helps until a poor 7-year-old girl approaches and shouts, "Stay calm, I'm a doctor." Everyone laughs, but seconds later, she does the impossible and changes 2 lives forever. Before we dive into the story, drop a comment below and tell us where you're watching from. Enjoy the story. The December morning in downtown Boston was bitter cold, the kind that cuts through your expensive coat like it's made of paper. David Thompson adjusted his silk tie one last time before stepping out of his black BMW onto Newbury Street. At 42, he was everything America dreams of becoming. CEO of Thompson Digital Solutions, worth over $60 million, with a penthouse overlooking Boston Harbor. But success, he'd learned the hard way, couldn't fill the hollow space where his heart used to be. "Mr. Thompson, the board meeting is in 20 minutes, his assistant Maria called from the passenger seat. David waved her off, already walking toward the gleaming glass tower that housed his empire. His mind was elsewhere, as it often was these days, trapped in memories of Catherine's laugh echoing through empty rooms. 4 years since the cancer took her, and still every morning felt like waking up in someone else's life. The pain started as a dull ache behind his sternum, like indigestion from the stress of another corporate acquisition. David paused at the corner of Newbury and Berkeley, pressing his hand against his chest. The morning rush hour flowed around him, business people clutching coffee cups, their breath creating small clouds in the frigid air. Then it hit him like a sledgehammer. The crushing weight exploded across his chest, radiating down his left arm with the force of a freight train. David gasped, stumbling backward against a lamppost. His vision blurred, the world tilting sideways, as if God himself had grabbed Boston and given it a violent shake. "Help!" he whispered. But the word came out as barely a breath. His legs gave way and he collapsed onto the frozen sidewalk. His $2,000 suit, no protection against the merciless concrete around him. The city kept moving. A few people glanced down, their faces showing that particular urban mixture of concern and self-preservation. Someone pulled out a phone, but in the chaos of the moment, nobody seemed to know what to do. "Call 911, a woman shouted. "Does anyone know CPR? Another voice called out. David's world was shrinking to a pinpoint of consciousness. Through the growing darkness, he could hear fragments of conversation, feel the vibration of footsteps on the sidewalk. But it all seemed to be happening to someone else, somewhere far away. That's when he heard it. A small, clear voice cutting through the panic like a bell. "Stay calm, I'm a doctor." The voice belonged to a child, high and confident in a way that made absolutely no sense. Through his fading vision, David saw a small figure pushing through the crowd of adults, dragging what looked like a cardboard box filled with candy bars. "Move, please let me through." The voice was getting closer, more urgent. "I can help him." "Sweetheart, you need to step back," an older man said gently. "This is a grown-up emergency." "I am a doctor," the child insisted, and there was something in that tiny voice, a desperate authority that made even the skeptical adults pause. "Please trust me. He's having a heart attack and we don't have much time." David felt small hands on his wrist, checking for a pulse with a precision that seemed impossible. Those same small hands began positioning his head, checking his airway with movements that spoke of real knowledge, not childhood pretend. "His pulse is weak but steady," the child's voice announced to the crowd. "I need everyone to step back and give him space to breathe. Someone call 911 and tell them we have a male approximately 42 years old experiencing what appears to be a myocardial infarction." Even through his haze, David recognized the medical terminology. This was no ordinary child playing dress-up. As consciousness slipped away from him like water through his fingers, the last thing David Thompson saw was a pair of dark brown eyes staring down at him with the intensity of someone far older than their years. Eyes that held both profound sadness and unwavering determination. "Stay with me, sir," the small voice whispered. "I won't let you die. Not today." 7-year-old Grace Rodriguez had been selling candy on the streets of Boston for 9 months now. ever since her grandmother Carmen could no longer work double shifts at the hospital cleaning company. But today was different. Today, she wasn't just Grace the Candy Girl. She was Dr. Grace Rodriguez, just like Mama had always dreamed she would be. "Sir, can you hear me?" Grace knelt beside David, her small hands surprisingly steady as she checked his erratic pulse. The crowd around them had grown silent, watching this impossible scene unfold. A child, barely tall enough to reach most adults' waists, was taking charge of a medical emergency with the confidence of a seasoned physician. David's lips were turning blue, his breathing shallow and labored. Grace had seen this before in the medical textbooks her mother had left behind, in the YouTube videos she watched at the public library when she should have been playing with other kids. "I need someone to time this," Grace announced, beginning chest compressions with surprising force. Her technique was flawless, hands positioned exactly over the sternum, elbows locked, compressing at least 2 inches deep. "Count out loud 30 compressions, then I'll give rescue breaths." "Honey, where did you learn this?" asked Mrs. Williams, the elderly woman who ran the nearby coffee shop and had watched Grace sell candy every day. "My mama taught me," Grace replied without breaking rhythm. 1, 2, 3, 4. She said, "Doctors never give up, never stop fighting for life." 15, 16, 17. The crowd began to murmur among themselves. Some pulled out phones to record, others called family members to tell them about the miracle they were witnessing. But Grace heard none of it. Her entire world had narrowed to the man beneath her hands and the steady rhythm of life-saving compressions. 28, 29, 30. Grace tilted David's head back, lifted his chin, and gave 2 rescue breaths, watching his chest rise and fall. She had practiced this sequence hundreds of times on the old CPR dummy at the community center, but never on a real person, never when someone's actual life hung in the balance. In the distance, sirens wailed, growing closer with each passing second. "Come on, sir," Grace whispered between compressions. "You have people who love you. Don't leave them yet. Don't leave them like my mama left me." David's eyelids fluttered. A small gasp escaped his lips. "He's responding," someone in the crowd shouted. Grace immediately checked his pulse again, stronger now, more regular. His color was improving, the blue tinge fading from his lips. She had done it. She had actually done it. The paramedics arrived just as David's eyes began to open, confused and unfocused, but undeniably alive. The lead paramedic, a burly man named Marcus with 22 years of experience, took one look at the scene and shook his head in amazement. "Who performed CPR?" Marcus asked, setting down his equipment. Every finger in the crowd pointed to Grace, who was now sitting quietly beside David, holding his hand and talking to him in soft, reassuring tones. "Little girl," Marcus said gently, "you just saved this man's life. Where did you learn to do that?" Grace looked up at him with those same dark, serious eyes that had captivated David moments before. "My mama was Dr. Sofia Rodriguez. She taught me that knowledge is the only thing nobody can ever take away from you." As the paramedics loaded David onto a stretcher, he managed to grab Grace's small hand with surprising strength. "What's your name?" he whispered hoarsely. "Grace Rodriguez," she replied. "And don't worry, sir, the hospital will take good care of you now." But as the ambulance doors closed and David was whisked away toward Boston Medical Center, none of them could have imagined that this was only the beginning of a story that would change both their lives forever. Back on the sidewalk, Grace picked up her box of candy bars, most of them scattered and forgotten in the chaos. Tomorrow she would return to this same corner and people would see her as just another poor kid trying to make a few dollars. They had no idea they had just witnessed the birth of a legend. Chapter 3. The Impossible Child. Dr. Rachel Foster had been running the emergency department at Boston Medical Center for 16 years, and she thought she had seen everything. Heart attacks, car accidents, overdoses, gunshot wounds, the full spectrum of human tragedy and resilience. But nothing had prepared her for the report that came in with the ambulance carrying David Thompson. "Dr. Foster," paramedic Marcus Williams called out as they wheeled David through the automatic doors. You're not going to believe this one. CPR was performed by a 7-year-old kid on the street. Perfect technique, textbook execution. I've never seen anything like it. Rachel raised an eyebrow but focused on her patient. David Thompson was stable now, conscious and responsive, his color good, despite the obvious exhaustion from his cardiac event. The preliminary EKG showed clear signs of a myocardial infarction, but whoever had performed CPR had kept him alive long enough for proper medical intervention. "Mr. Thompson, I'm Dr. Foster. How are you feeling?" "Like I got hit by a truck," David managed, his voice raspy. "But alive thanks to a little girl. Is she okay? Did someone make sure she got home safely?" "Sir, we need to focus on you right now," Rachel replied, though she made a mental note to follow up on the child later. "You've had a heart attack and we need to get you to the catheterization lab immediately." As they prepped David for emergency cardiac catheterization, Rachel couldn't shake the paramedic's story. A 7-year-old performing CPR. It was medically improbable, if not impossible. Children that age barely had the physical strength to provide effective chest compressions, let alone the knowledge and emotional composure required. 2 hours later, after successfully opening David's blocked coronary artery, Rachel found herself reviewing the street camera footage that police had provided. What she saw made her question everything she thought she knew about medicine and child development. The little girl on the screen moved with purpose and precision that defied explanation. Her hand placement was perfect, her compression depth appropriate, her rescue breathing technique flawless. She even managed the crowd, gave clear instructions to bystanders, and maintained perfect timing throughout the entire sequence. "Dr. Foster." Nurse Jennifer Martinez knocked on her office door. "There's someone here asking about Mr. Thompson. Says she's the girl who helped him." Rachel looked up from the footage, curious. "Send her in." Grace Rodriguez walked into Dr. Foster's office wearing the same simple clothes from earlier. Faded jeans, a worn pink jacket, and shoes that had seen better days. But her posture was confident, her gaze direct and intelligent. "I wanted to make sure he was okay," Grace said simply. "Mr. Thompson, is he going to be all right? And you are?" "Grace Rodriguez. I performed CPR on him this morning." The way she said it, matter-of-fact and professional, sent chills down Rachel's spine. "Grace, where did you learn to perform CPR?" "My mama taught me, Dr. Sophia Rodriguez. She used to work at Children's Hospital before she got sick." Grace's voice remained steady, but Rachel noticed her hands clenched slightly at her sides. The name hit Rachel like a physical blow. Dr. Sophia Rodriguez. She remembered her well, brilliant pediatric emergency physician, one of the most dedicated doctors Rachel had ever worked with. Sophia had died 3 years ago from ovarian cancer, a devastating loss to the medical community. "Sophia Rodriguez was your mother?" Grace nodded. "She taught me everything she could before she died. Said knowledge was the only inheritance she could give me that nobody could steal." Rachel studied the child before her. The serious eyes, the way she held herself, the calm confidence in the face of adult authority. This was Sophia's daughter, and suddenly everything started making sense. "Grace, what you did today was extraordinary. You saved that man's life, using techniques that most adults don't know. Mama always said that medicine isn't about age or size. It's about knowledge, compassion, and the courage to act when someone needs help." Grace paused, looking directly at Rachel. "Is Mr. Thompson really going to be okay? I need to know I did everything right." "You did everything perfectly," Rachel assured her. "Better than perfect, actually. You gave him the exact care he needed at the exact moment he needed it." For the first time since entering the office, Grace's composure cracked slightly. Relief flooded her features, followed quickly by something else. A determination that seemed far too mature for her 7 years. "Dr. Foster, can I ask you something?" "Of course. How do I become a real doctor like Mama was? I know I'm just a kid, but I want to help people. I want to save lives." Rachel stared at this remarkable child, Sophia's daughter, sitting in her office, asking questions that most people didn't consider until college. In that moment, she made a decision that would change everything. Grace, I think that's a conversation we need to have very carefully, Rachel said. But first, there's someone I think you should meet. Chapter 4. The Doctor's Daughter. 4 years earlier, Dr. Sofia Rodriguez had been racing through the corridors of Children's Hospital with the same determination her daughter would later show on Newbury Street. But that night, Sofia was fighting two battles, one against time and another against the cancer that was slowly destroying her body from the inside. Dr. Rodriguez, we have an emergency in Trauma Bay 2, Nurse Johnson had called out. Car accident, multiple casualties, one critical. Sofia had paused, only long enough to swallow another pain pill before rushing to help, despite the fact that her own chemotherapy session was scheduled in just 3 hours. At 32, she was already considered one of the most promising pediatric emergency physicians in Boston, known for her innovative techniques and her refusal to give up on any patient. The critical patient was a woman named Catherine Thompson, wife of a prominent businessman. She'd been hit by a drunk driver while walking home from a charity event. Internal bleeding, possible traumatic brain injury, multiple fractures. The kind of case that required every ounce of skill and determination Sofia possessed. For 9 hours, Sofia had fought to save Catherine's life. She pioneered experimental procedures, consulted with specialists via video conference, and refused to leave the operating room, even when her own body was begging for rest. David Thompson had paced the waiting room, clinging to hope while Sofia battled the impossible. But medicine, Sofia knew, was not always about winning. Sometimes it was about fighting with such grace and determination that even in defeat, something beautiful emerged. Catherine Thompson had died at 4:23 a.m., with Sofia holding her hand and David sobbing in the hallway outside. It was Sofia who had delivered the news. Sofia who had stayed with David as he crumpled under the weight of loss. Sofia who had somehow found words of comfort despite her own exhaustion and pain. She fought, Sofia had told David. She fought so hard, and she knew you loved her. That's not nothing, Mr. Thompson. Love like that. It echoes forward. It changes things. David had looked up at Sofia through his tears and seen something extraordinary. A doctor who had given everything she had, who had treated his wife not as a case or a statistic, but as a human being worthy of every possible effort. 3 months later, Sofia herself had been the patient, lying in a hospital bed at Boston Medical Center while ovarian cancer ravaged her body. But even then, even as her own strength faded, she had spent her final weeks teaching 3-year-old Grace everything she could. "Mama, why do people get sick?" Grace had asked one afternoon, sitting cross-legged on Sofia's hospital bed while her mother drew diagrams of the human heart on a napkin. "Sometimes bodies break down, Mija," Sofia had explained gently, "but that's why we need doctors, to fix what's broken, to fight for people who can't fight for themselves. Will you teach me to be a doctor like you?" Sofia had smiled through her pain. "I'll teach you everything I can, baby girl, but being a doctor isn't just about knowing things. It's about caring so much that you're willing to carry other people's pain to help them heal." Grace had nodded solemnly, absorbing every word. "Promise me something, Grace," Sofia had whispered during one of their last conversations. "Promise me you'll use what I teach you to help people. Promise me you'll never let anyone tell you that you're too young or too small to make a difference." "I promise, Mama." Sofia had died 2 days later, leaving behind a 3-year-old daughter with an extraordinary gift and the determination to use it. What she couldn't have known was that 4 years later, that same daughter would save the life of the man who had watched Sofia fight so desperately to save his wife. The universe, it seemed, had a plan all along. Now, as Dr. Foster prepared to introduce Grace to David Thompson, none of them understood they were about to complete a circle that had begun with one act of medical heroism and was about to transform into something much larger. In room 418, David Thompson lay recovering from his cardiac catheterization, staring at the ceiling and thinking about the little girl who had saved his life. Somewhere in the back of his mind, something nagged at him. a familiar quality in those dark, determined eyes that he couldn't quite place. Soon, he would understand everything. Chapter 5. The Circle. Complete. David Thompson had been awake for 4 hours, and the questions wouldn't stop coming. Doctors, nurses, administrators, everyone wanted to know about the child who had saved his life, but David found himself unable to focus on their inquiries. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw those dark, serious eyes staring down at him with an intensity that seemed impossibly familiar. "Mr. Thompson," Dr. Foster knocked gently on his room door. "There's someone here who wants to check on you. The young lady who helped you this morning." David's heart rate monitor immediately picked up pace. "Please send her in." Grace Rodriguez walked into room 418 with the same quiet confidence she had shown on the street. She was even smaller than David remembered, barely tall enough to see over his hospital bed, but there was something about her presence that filled the room. "How are you feeling, Mr. Thompson?" Grace asked, her voice professionally concerned but warm. "Thanks to you, I'm alive," David replied, studying her face carefully. There was something so familiar about her features, something that tugged at memories he couldn't quite grasp. "I need to thank you properly. What you did today, that took incredible courage." Grace shrugged as if saving lives was something she did every Tuesday. "Mama always said courage isn't the absence of fear. It's doing what's right, even when you're scared. Your mama sounds like a wise woman." She was. Grace's voice carried a weight of loss that no 7-year-old should have to bear. "Dr. Sofia Rodriguez. She died when I was 3. The words hit David like another heart attack. Dr. Sofia Rodriguez. The name crashed through his consciousness, bringing with it a flood of memories that he had tried desperately to bury. Children's Hospital. Catherine's accident. The doctor who had fought so hard, who had stayed with them through the worst night of his life, who had held Catherine's hand as she slipped away. David stared at Grace with new understanding, seeing now what he had missed before, the shape of her eyes, the determined set of her jaw, the way she carried herself with quiet dignity. She was Sofia Rodriguez's daughter, the daughter of the woman who had tried to save his wife. "Your mother," David whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "She tried to save my wife 4 years ago, Catherine Thompson." Grace's eyes widened with recognition. "You're him, the man Mama cried about. She said she tried everything, that she was so sorry she couldn't save Mrs. Thompson." "She gave everything she had," David said, tears beginning to flow freely. "Your mother was extraordinary. She fought for Catherine like she was family. She stayed with us, comforted us, never gave up hope, even when the situation was hopeless." The room fell silent, except for the quiet beeping of medical equipment. Two souls connected by tragedy and loss, staring at each other across a hospital bed, understanding finally dawning between them. "Mama used to say that sometimes God puts people in our path for reasons we can't understand," Grace said softly. "She said that every life we touch touches us back." David reached out and took Grace's small hand in his. "Your mother saved my soul that night, even though she couldn't save Catherine's life. And today you saved my life. It's like..." He paused, struggling to find the words. "It's like Sofia is still out there, still fighting to save people. Through me," Grace finished, understanding perfectly. "Through you." Dr. Foster, who had been quietly observing from the doorway, felt tears of her own beginning to fall. In 16 years of emergency medicine, she had never witnessed anything quite like this. A circle of compassion and healing that transcended death itself. "Grace," David said, his voice growing stronger, "I owe your mother a debt I can never repay. She gave everything she had trying to save Catherine, and now you've given me a second chance at life. You don't owe us anything, Mr. Thompson. That's not why Mama became a doctor, and it's not why I want to be one." David looked at this remarkable child, this living legacy of one of the most compassionate people he had ever known, and made a decision that would change both their lives forever. "Grace, what if I told you that you don't have to wait until you're grown up to be a doctor? What if I told you that there might be a way for you to start helping people right now, today?" Grace's eyes lit up with a hope so bright it seemed to illuminate the entire room. "What do you mean?" David squeezed her hand gently. "I mean, Grace Rodriguez, that your real education is about to begin." Dr. Foster had seen many remarkable things in her career, but watching David Thompson and Grace Rodriguez discover their connection had left her speechless. Now, as David spoke about Grace's real education beginning, she found herself leaning forward, captivated by what was unfolding before her eyes. "Mr. Thompson," Dr. Foster interjected gently. "What exactly are you proposing?" David looked between Grace and the doctor, his mind racing with possibilities that had seemed impossible just hours earlier. "Dr. Foster, what if I told you that I've been looking for a way to honor my wife's memory for 4 years, and I think I just found it?" Grace watched him carefully, her young mind processing the adult conversation with remarkable clarity. "You want to help me become a doctor?" "I want to help you become the doctor your mother dreamed you would be," David replied. "But more than that, I want to make sure that other children like you, children with extraordinary gifts and circumstances, get the chances they deserve." David's voice grew stronger as the idea took shape. "Dr. Foster, what would it take to create a special program here at Boston Medical? A youth medical training initiative that could identify gifted children and provide them with real medical education?" Dr. Foster's eyebrows shot up. "Mr. Thompson, that's an incredibly complex undertaking. There are legal issues, educational requirements, safety protocols, all of which can be solved with proper planning and adequate funding," David interrupted. "I'm talking about creating something revolutionary, a program that doesn't just wait for children to grow up before nurturing their gifts." Grace's heart was beating so fast she could hear it in her ears. "You mean I could really learn? Like actually learn medicine? Not just from old textbooks, but from real doctors?" "With proper supervision and age-appropriate modifications, yes," David said, turning to Dr. Foster. "Doctor, you saw what Grace did today. That wasn't luck or coincidence. That was training, knowledge, and natural ability. How many other children might be out there with similar potential, lacking only opportunity?" Dr. Foster found herself caught up in David's vision, despite her professional caution. "It would require board approval, special insurance, modified curriculum, and I can provide the funding for all of it," David said firmly. "I can endow the program, hire the best educators, create scholarships for children who show aptitude. We could call it the Sofia Rodriguez Youth Medical Education Program," Grace gasped, her eyes filling with tears. "You'd name it after Mama?" "Your mother dedicated her life to healing people," David replied. "This program would be her legacy continued through you and other children like you." Dr. Foster's mind was spinning with the possibilities. If we could design it properly, with safety as the top priority, it could revolutionize how we think about medical education. Children learn languages most easily when they're young. Why not medical concepts as well? "Exactly," David said, his business acumen taking over. "We could start with basic anatomy, physiology, first aid certification. As the children mature, we could expand the curriculum. By the time they're ready for medical school, they'd be years ahead of their peers." Grace was practically vibrating with excitement. "And I could help other people? Really help them?" "You already are helping people, Doctor," Foster said softly. "What you did today proves that. But yes, with proper training, you could help many more." David reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out his phone. "Dr. Foster, I'm going to make some calls. By the end of the week, I want to have a preliminary proposal for the hospital board. Grace, I want you to think about what kind of doctors you'd like to learn from." "All kinds," Grace replied immediately. "Emergency medicine like Mama, but also pediatrics, surgery, cardiology." She paused, looking directly at David. "Especially cardiology. I want to learn how to fix hearts." The symbolism wasn't lost on any of them. Grace wanted to fix hearts, literally and figuratively. "There's one more thing," David said, his voice becoming serious. "Grace, this program would be demanding. It would require dedication, study, hard work. Are you prepared for that?" Grace straightened her shoulders, and for a moment she looked exactly like her mother had during those desperate hours trying to save Catherine. "Mr. Thompson, I've been preparing for this my whole life. Mama always said that our gifts aren't really ours. They belong to the people we're meant to help." David felt his own heart, newly repaired and beating steadily, fill with emotion. "Then let's begin." As the three of them sat in that hospital room, none of them could have imagined that they were launching something that would eventually become one of the most innovative medical education programs in the country. They couldn't foresee the hundreds of gifted children who would benefit, the lives that would be saved, the barriers that would be broken. All they knew was that sometimes the most extraordinary journeys begin with the simplest decision to say yes to possibility. "Dr. Foster," David said, extending his hand, "would you be willing to be the director of this program?" Rachel Foster looked at David Thompson, then at Grace Rodriguez, Sophia's brilliant daughter, sitting there with hope shining in her eyes like a beacon. "Mr. Thompson," she said, shaking his hand firmly, "I think that's the best idea I've heard in 16 years. But none of them knew that their conversation was being overheard, and that within hours their remarkable story would begin spreading far beyond the walls of Boston Medical Center. Chapter 6. The program begins. 2 weeks after David's heart attack, the conference room at Boston Medical Center buzzed with tension. The emergency board meeting had been called to discuss what some members were already calling the Thompson Proposal, a radical youth medical education program that challenged every conventional approach to medical training. "With all due respect, Mr. Thompson," Dr. Patricia Hawkins, the hospital's chief administrator, said from across the mahogany table, "what you're proposing is unprecedented. We're talking about allowing children, some as young as 7, into medical training environments. The liability alone could bankrupt us." David adjusted his tie, the same nervous gesture he'd made before that fateful walk down Newbury Street. But this time, he wasn't alone. Dr. Foster sat beside him, armed with research and preliminary curricula, while Grace waited in the hallway with David's assistant Maria, practicing anatomy flashcards. "Dr. Hawkins," David replied calmly, "3 weeks ago, a 7-year-old child saved my life using medical techniques that most adults don't possess. That same child is the daughter of one of the most dedicated physicians this hospital has ever employed. We're not talking about putting children in dangerous situations. We're talking about nurturing extraordinary gifts under careful supervision." Board member Dr. James Kellerman, a surgeon with 32 years of experience, leaned forward skeptically. "Mr. Thompson, I understand your gratitude, but medicine requires maturity, judgment, emotional stability. Children simply don't possess these qualities." "Then how do you explain what Grace Rodriguez accomplished?" Dr. Foster interjected, sliding a tablet across the table. "I've analyzed the street camera footage with 3 independent experts. Her CPR technique was flawless. Her timing was perfect. Her decision-making under pressure exceeded that of many first-year medical residents." The board members passed the tablet around, watching Grace's performance in stunned silence. Even Dr. Kellerman's expression began to shift from skepticism to fascination. "Furthermore," Dr. Foster continued, "I've researched similar programs internationally. The Young Physicians Initiative in Sweden has been training gifted children for 18 years with remarkable success. Their graduates consistently outperformed traditionally educated medical students." David sensed the room's energy shifting. "I'm prepared to fund this program completely, $25 million initially, with additional funding as needed. We're talking about scholarships, specialized facilities, insurance coverage, legal protection. The hospital's only investment would be expertise and space." Dr. Elizabeth Santos, the head of pediatrics, spoke for the first time. "What kind of age limits are we discussing?" "Children who demonstrate exceptional aptitude between ages 7 and 16, Dr. Foster replied. "There would be a rigorous screening process, psychological evaluation, academic testing, demonstrated interest in medicine." We're not talking about every child who wants to play doctor. And what happens when these children grow up? Dr. Hawkins asked. Do they automatically get admitted to medical school? They earn their way in just like everyone else, David said firmly. But they'll enter with advantages that traditional students can't match. Years of hands-on experience, deep understanding of medical concepts, and most importantly, absolute certainty that medicine is their calling. Board member Dr. Rachel Kim raised her hand. I'd like to hear from the child herself. If we're going to base a program on her abilities, shouldn't we evaluate her directly? David smiled. This was the moment he'd been hoping for. Grace, would you come in, please? Grace Rodriguez entered the boardroom with the same quiet confidence she'd shown in every situation. She wore a simple blue dress that David had bought for her, and her dark hair was neatly braided, but it was her eyes, those serious, intelligent eyes, that immediately commanded the room's attention. Hello, everyone, Grace said politely. I'm Grace Rodriguez, and I want to be a doctor like my mama. Doctor. Kellerman leaned forward, his voice gentle but probing. Grace, tell us why you want to study medicine. Because people get hurt and sick and somebody needs to help them, Grace replied without hesitation. My mama always said that being a doctor isn't a job. It's a responsibility to carry other people's pain until you can help them heal. Dear, what makes you think you're ready for such responsibility at your age? Dr. Santos asked. Grace thought carefully before answering. I don't think I'm ready for all of it yet. That's why I need to learn. But I know I'm ready to start learning because I already understand the most important part, that every person's life has value. And if you have the knowledge to help someone, you have the duty to use it. Grace's voice grew stronger. When I saw Mr. Thompson on the ground, I could have walked away like other people were doing. But Mama taught me that knowledge without action is just selfishness. The room fell silent. Dr. Hawkins stared at this 7-year-old child who had just articulated the fundamental principle of medical ethics with more clarity than some medical students managed after 4 years of study. Grace, Dr. Foster said gently, if we created this program, would you be willing to work very hard to study subjects that other children your age don't learn? Dr. Foster, I already study anatomy and physiology every day at the library. I already practice CPR techniques and first aid. The only difference would be that I'd finally have real teachers instead of just books and videos. Dr. Kellerman removed his glasses and cleaned them slowly, a gesture the other board members recognized as his way of processing difficult decisions. Grace, would you mind stepping outside for a moment while we discuss this? Of course. Grace turned to leave, then paused at the door. Just, whatever you decide, please remember that there might be other kids like me out there, kids who want to help people but don't know how to start. This program isn't really about me. It's about giving them a chance, too. As the door closed behind her, the board members sat in contemplative silence. Finally, Dr. Kellerman spoke. 22 years ago, I would have said this was impossible. 12 years ago, I would have called it irresponsible. He looked around the table. Today, I'm going to say it's necessary. One by one, the board members began to nod in agreement. The Sofia Rodriguez Youth Medical Education Program was about to become reality. Chapter 7, First Day. 6 months later, Grace Rodriguez stood outside the newly constructed Young Physician Center at Boston Medical Center, clutching a backpack filled with medical textbooks that most college students would find challenging. The building itself was a marvel, designed specifically for the program with scaled-down anatomy labs, simulation rooms equipped with pediatric-sized equipment, and classrooms that could accommodate both children and adult instructors. Ready for your first day, Dr. Rodriguez? David Thompson asked, using the honorary title that had become Grace's nickname around the hospital. Over the past months, as the program developed, David had become something between a mentor and a surrogate father to Grace, while she had become the daughter he and Catherine had always dreamed of having. I've been ready for this my whole life, Grace replied, but David could hear the nervous excitement in her voice. Today marked the official launch of the program, with Grace and 13 other carefully selected children beginning their extraordinary medical education. Dr. Foster emerged from the building, clipboard in hand, and barely contained excitement on her face. Good morning, everyone. Today you become the first class of the Sofia Rodriguez Youth Medical Education Program. You're about to make history. The group of young students ranged in age from 7 to 15. There was Marcus Williams, a 13-year-old from Detroit who had performed emergency first aid after a shooting in his neighborhood. 10-year-old Sarah Chen had taught herself advanced chemistry after watching her diabetic grandfather struggle with insulin management. 15-year-old James Thompson had been volunteering at a free clinic since he was 12, learning Spanish to better communicate with patients. Each child had a story, a driving passion for medicine that transcended their years. Before we begin, Dr. Foster announced, I want you to understand something important. This program exists because we believe that extraordinary gifts deserve extraordinary opportunities, but with opportunity comes responsibility. You're not just students, you're pioneers. Grace felt a flutter of nervousness mixed with pride. Around her, the other children seemed equally awed by the magnitude of what they were undertaking. Their first instructor was Dr. Michael Chen, a renowned anatomy professor who had volunteered to adapt his medical school curriculum for their unique needs. Welcome to Introduction to Human Anatomy, he began, leading them into a specially designed lab. Today, we're going to start with the cardiovascular system, specifically understanding what happens during a myocardial infarction. Grace's hand shot up immediately. Like what happened to Mr. Thompson. Exactly like what happened to Mr. Thompson, Dr. Chen confirmed. Grace, would you mind sharing with the class what you observed during his heart attack? For the next hour, Grace found herself at the center of a discussion that moved seamlessly between her real-world experience and advanced medical theory. The other children asked questions that demonstrated not just curiosity, but genuine understanding of complex concepts. The beautiful thing about young minds, Dr. Chen explained to Dr. Foster afterward, is that they don't know what's supposed to be too difficult for them. They approach medical concepts with the same openness they bring to learning languages or mathematics. By lunchtime, the children had covered material that typically took first-year medical students weeks to master. But more importantly, they had begun to form bonds with each other and with their instructors that went beyond traditional teacher-student relationships. How does it feel to be here? Sarah Chen asked Grace as they ate lunch in the program's dedicated cafeteria. Like I'm finally where I'm supposed to be, Grace replied honestly. Like Mama's dream is coming true. That afternoon brought their first simulation exercise, a controlled emergency scenario where they would work as a team to stabilize a patient, an advanced medical mannequin experiencing cardiac arrest. Dr. Foster watched nervously as the children approached the simulation with the same seriousness they would bring to a real emergency. Grace naturally took charge, her experience on Newbury Street giving her confidence the others lacked. Marcus, you check airway and breathing. Sarah, monitor pulse and blood pressure. James, prepare the defibrillator simulator. Grace, Dr. Foster called out, remember to explain your reasoning as you work. Right, Grace nodded, never taking her eyes off the mannequin. First priority in cardiac arrest is immediate CPR, to maintain blood flow to vital organs. We need to assess rhythm before defibrillation because not all cardiac arrest patterns respond to electrical shock. As the simulation progressed, Dr. Foster found herself amazed by the children's intuitive teamwork and Grace's natural leadership abilities. These weren't just smart kids playing doctor. They were developing real medical instincts under carefully controlled conditions. Excellent work, everyone, Dr. Foster announced as the simulation ended. You just demonstrated skills that many nursing students struggle with. After the other children left for the day, Grace lingered in the anatomy lab, studying models of the human heart with an intensity that reminded Dr. Foster of Sofia Rodriguez. Grace, how are you feeling about the program? Dr. Foster asked. It's everything I hoped it would be, Grace replied. But Dr. Foster, I keep thinking about what I said to the board, about other kids who might be out there. When will we find them? Dr. Foster smiled. Actually, Grace, that's your next challenge. We want you and the other program participants to help us identify other gifted children. You'll be our ambassadors, visiting schools and community centers, sharing your story and looking for others who share your passion. Grace's eyes lit up with excitement. You mean we get to help build the program? We mean you get to help change the world, Dr. Foster replied, one young doctor at a time. As Grace finally headed home that evening, she carried with her not just the satisfaction of an extraordinary first day, but the growing understanding that she was part of something much larger than herself, a movement that would transform how society thought about age, ability, and the nature of medical calling. The program was no longer just David Thompson's tribute to Sofia Rodriguez. It was becoming Grace's legacy to future generations of young healers. Chapter 8. Media Attention. 3 months into the program, Grace Rodriguez found herself sitting in a television studio in downtown Boston, facing the intense lights and cameras of Boston Morning Live. The producer had promised this would be a friendly interview, but Grace could feel the weight of expectation pressing down on her small shoulders. And we're back in 5, 4, 3. The floor director counted down silently, and anchor Janet Peterson's professional smile returned. We're here with Grace Rodriguez, the remarkable 7-year-old who not only saved a man's life through CPR, but has since become the youngest student in a revolutionary medical education program. Grace, tell us how it feels to be studying medicine at such a young age. Grace had practiced this answer with Dr. Foster, but speaking to millions of viewers felt different than rehearsing in an empty room. It feels like what I'm supposed to be doing, Ms. Peterson. My mama always said that gifts are meant to be shared, not hidden. Your mother, Dr. Sofia Rodriguez, was herself a physician who died when you were very young. Do you feel pressure to follow in her footsteps? I don't feel pressure, Grace replied thoughtfully. I feel purpose, like Mama planted seeds in me, and now they're finally growing. The interview continued for 10 minutes with Grace, answering questions about the program, her studies, and her dreams with a poise that amazed viewers across the country. But what happened afterward would prove far more significant than the interview itself. Within hours of the broadcast, Boston Medical Center's phones were ringing constantly. Parents from across the nation called asking about the program. Medical professionals wanted to volunteer. Education experts requested information about the curriculum, but not all the attention was positive. Dr. Foster, we have a problem, David Thompson said, bursting into her office the following Monday morning with a stack of newspapers and printouts. Look at these headlines. Dr. Foster read them with growing concern. Child exploitation disguised as education, from the Boston Globe. Are we pushing kids too hard? From USA Today. The dangers of medical training for minors, from the Journal of Medical Ethics. It gets worse, David continued. The Massachusetts Department of Education is launching an investigation into our curriculum. They're questioning whether we're in violation of child labor laws, and there's a group called Protecting Childhood organizing protests. Grace, who had been quietly working on anatomy homework in the corner of Dr. Foster's office, looked up with concern. Are they going to shut down the program? Not if I have anything to say about it, Dr. Foster replied firmly. But Grace, you need to understand something. When you change the world pushes back. There will always be people who think children should stay in their assigned boxes. The criticism intensified when Dr. Harold Beckman, a prominent child psychologist, published an op-ed titled The Grace Rodriguez Phenomenon, Robbing Children of Their Childhood. In it, he argued that the program placed unrealistic pressure on young minds and could cause long-term psychological damage. These children are being asked to confront mortality, suffering, and life or death decisions at an age when they should be playing with toys and learning basic arithmetic, Dr. Beckman wrote. No matter how gifted they may appear, they lack the emotional development necessary to handle such weighty responsibilities. Oh, the criticism stung, but it also galvanized support from unexpected sources. Dr. Maria Santos, a renowned child development expert from Harvard, published a counter-argument defending the program. History is filled with examples of extraordinary young people who achieved remarkable things when given appropriate opportunities, Dr. Santos wrote. Mozart composed symphonies at age 8. Mary Anning discovered important fossils as a child. We must distinguish between exploitation and nurturing genuine gifts. More importantly, support came from the medical community itself. Prominent physicians began sharing stories of young people who had shown early medical aptitude but had been discouraged from pursuing their interests until much later in life. Dr. Benjamin Wright, chief of surgery at Johns Hopkins, wrote a particularly powerful letter to the Boston Globe. I have observed Grace Rodriguez in action during a visit to Boston Medical. What I saw was not a child being pushed beyond her limits, but a young person finally receiving the education her extraordinary gifts demanded. To deny such opportunities in the name of protecting childhood is to waste some of humanity's greatest potential. The controversy reached its peak when the State Education Board scheduled formal hearings to determine whether the program met legal and ethical standards. Grace and the other program participants would be required to testify about their experiences. "Are you nervous about the hearing?" Dr. Foster asked Grace the night before. "A little," Grace admitted. "But Mama used to say that truth has its own power. If we're really helping kids like me, then the truth will speak for itself. And if the board decides to shut us down?" Grace was quiet for a long moment. "Then we'll find another way. Mr. Thompson taught me that when you're doing something important, obstacles aren't reasons to stop. They're puzzles to solve." The hearing was scheduled for the following Tuesday. Grace Rodriguez, at 8 years old, was about to defend not just her own education, but the fundamental principle that extraordinary children deserve extraordinary opportunities. As she prepared for what could be the most important testimony of her young life, Grace thought about her mother's words. "Knowledge without action is just selfishness." Tomorrow she would have to prove that the action they were taking was not just beneficial for her, but essential for other gifted children who deserved the same chance to make a difference. The future of the Sofia Rodriguez Youth Medical Education Program, and perhaps the broader question of how society nurtures exceptional young minds, would rest on the words of an 8-year-old girl who had already saved one life and was determined to save many more. Chapter 9. The Hearing. The Massachusetts State Education Board hearing room was packed beyond capacity on Tuesday morning, with overflow crowds watching on closed-circuit television in adjoining rooms. Media representatives filled the front rows, while medical professionals, educators, and parents crowded every available seat. At the center of it all sat Grace Rodriguez, looking impossibly small at the witness table, yet radiating a calm confidence that seemed to fill the entire space. "Ms. Rodriguez," began Board Chairman Dr. E. Robert Fitzgerald, "you understand that today's hearing will determine whether the program you're participating in can continue to operate, correct?" "Yes, sir," Grace replied clearly. "And I understand that some people think children like me shouldn't be learning advanced medicine yet. We want to hear your perspective on that question. In your own words, tell us about your experience in the program." Grace had prepared for this moment for weeks, but as she looked out at the sea of faces, some supportive, others skeptical, she felt the weight of representing not just herself, but every gifted child who had ever been told they were too young to pursue their dreams. "When my mama was dying," Grace began, her voice steady despite the emotion of the memory, "she taught me everything she could about medicine, not because she wanted to make me grow up too fast, but because she could see that helping people was what I was meant to do." The room was absolutely silent, every person hanging on her words. "For 4 years after Mama died, I kept studying on my own. reading her medical books, watching videos, practicing on dolls. But nobody believed that a little kid could really understand medicine. When Mr. Thompson had his heart attack, I finally got to use what I'd learned. I saved his life, not because I was trying to be grown up, but because I was finally being myself. Board member Dr. Patricia Williams leaned forward. Grace, some experts worry that studying medicine at your age might be harmful to your emotional development. How do you respond to that concern? Grace considered the question seriously. Dr. Williams, I think what's harmful is when children have gifts and aren't allowed to use them. Every day in the program, I learn about how bodies work and how to help people feel better. That doesn't make me sad or scared. It makes me excited about the future. But what about normal childhood activities? Pressed Dr. Williams. Don't you miss playing games, watching cartoons, just being a regular kid? I do play games, Grace replied with a slight smile. I play anatomy games, medical trivia, simulation scenarios. I watch videos, medical procedure videos and educational documentaries. The difference is that my version of fun happens to be learning how to save lives. Dr. Harold Beckman, the psychologist who had written critically about the program, spoke from the audience. Grace, don't you think children your age should be protected from exposure to suffering and death? Grace's expression grew more serious. Dr. Beckman, I was 3 years old when I watched my mama die from cancer. I learned about suffering and death whether I was in a medical program or not. The difference is that now I'm learning how to fight against those things instead of just feeling helpless. The response sent murmurs through the crowd. Even Dr. Beckman seemed taken aback by the directness of Grace's answer. Let me ask you something different, said Board Vice Chairman Dr. Jennifer Lee. If this program didn't exist, what would you be doing instead? I'd still be studying medicine on my own, just like I was before, Grace replied immediately. I'd still be reading medical textbooks at the library, still practicing CPR techniques, still dreaming about becoming a doctor like Mama. The only difference is that now I have real teachers helping me learn correctly and friends who understand why medicine matters to me. At that moment, the hearing room doors burst open. A hospital security guard rushed in, followed by Dr. Foster, both looking panicked. Dr. Fitzgerald, Dr. Foster called out urgently. I'm sorry to interrupt, but we have an emergency situation. There's been a multi-car accident just outside the building, multiple casualties, and our ambulances are delayed due to traffic. The room erupted in confusion as people turned to look outside. Through the large windows, they could see the aftermath of what appeared to be a serious collision involving at least 3 vehicles. The nearest hospital is 18 minutes away, Dr. Foster continued breathlessly. We have injured people who need immediate medical attention. Without hesitation, Grace stood up from the witness table. Dr. Foster, I can help. Grace, no, Dr. Fitzgerald protested. This is exactly what we're concerned about, exposing children to traumatic situations. But Grace was already moving toward the door, her medical training taking over completely. People are hurt. That's more important than a hearing. Several of the medical professionals in the audience immediately followed her, including Dr. Beckman, who later said he acted purely on instinct. What happened next would be recorded by dozens of cell phone cameras and news crews who had been covering the hearing. Outside the building, Grace Rodriguez, still wearing the formal dress she had chosen for her testimony, immediately began triaging the accident victims with a competence that left seasoned professionals stunned. This man has a probable concussion and possible internal bleeding, she announced, kneeling beside the driver of the first car. He needs immediate transport. This woman has a broken arm and lacerations, but stable vitals, second priority. As she moved from victim to victim, providing first aid and directing the emergency response, Grace demonstrated not just medical knowledge, but the kind of calm leadership under pressure that most people never develop. Beckman found himself holding an IV bag while Grace inserted the line into a young man's arm with steady hand. How did you learn to do that? He asked, his earlier criticism forgotten. Dr. Chen taught us IV insertion last month, Grace replied matter-of-factly, never taking her attention away from her patient. But mostly, I watched Mama do it hundreds of times. By the time the ambulances arrived, Grace and the other medical professionals had stabilized all the victims and potentially saved at least 2 lives. As the last ambulance pulled away, the crowd that had gathered outside began to applaud. Dr. Fitzgerald, who had witnessed the entire scene, approached Grace with an expression of complete amazement. "Young lady, I think you just answered every question we could possibly have about your program." Grace looked up at him, her dress dirty and her hair disheveled, but her eyes shining with the satisfaction of having helped people in need. "Does this mean the program can continue?" "Grace," Dr. Fitzgerald replied, "I think this means your program is about to expand nationwide." As the crowd began to disperse and the hearing room prepared to reconvene, Grace Rodriguez had once again proven that extraordinary circumstances require extraordinary people, regardless of their age. The formal vote was unanimous. The Sofia Rodriguez Youth Medical Education Program would not only continue, but would receive full state endorsement and support. Chapter 10. National Recognition. 6 months after the hearing that nearly shut down the program, Grace Rodriguez stood before a crowd of 600 people at the inaugural National Young Medical Professionals Conference. The event, held at Boston's Convention Center, brought together gifted children from across the country who had been selected for newly established youth medical programs in 15 states. 2 years ago, Grace began, her voice now confident and clear through the auditorium's sound system, "I was just a kid selling candy on the streets of Boston. I had dreams of becoming a doctor like my mama, but nobody believed that someone my age could really understand medicine." In the audience, David Thompson watched with pride as the young girl who had saved his life now inspired hundreds of other children to pursue their medical dreams. Beside him sat Dr. Foster, who had been promoted to National Director of Youth Medical Education Programs, overseeing the expansion that Grace's testimony had made possible. "Today, I want to tell you that your age doesn't limit your ability to help people," Grace continued. "Your knowledge does. Your compassion does. Your willingness to act when others need help does. But your age is just a number that some people use to try to keep you from reaching your potential." The children in the audience, ranging from 7-year-old David Kim from Los Angeles, who had taught himself surgical suturing techniques, to 15-year-old Rachel Morrison from Atlanta, who had developed a new protocol for treating pediatric asthma, listened with the rapt attention of those who had finally found their tribe. "In our program, we've learned that being young doctors in training means we get to see medicine differently," Grace continued. "We ask questions that adults have stopped asking. We find solutions that adults have stopped looking for. We care in ways that adults sometimes forget how to care." Over the past year, the success stories had multiplied exponentially. Marcus Williams, the 13-year-old from Detroit, had assisted in developing a new community emergency response protocol that had been adopted by urban hospitals nationwide. Sarah Chen had created simplified diabetic management tools that were now being used in nursing homes across New England. "But the most important thing we've learned," Grace said, building to her conclusion, "is that medicine isn't really about what we know. It's about how we use what we know to serve others." The applause was thunderous, but Grace wasn't finished. "I want to end with a challenge," she said, raising her voice above the crowd. "Every one of us in this room has been given extraordinary gifts. The question isn't whether we deserve these gifts or whether we're too young to use them. The question is, what are we going to do with them?" As the conference continued over the next 3 days, Grace found herself surrounded by children whose stories echoed her own. Young people who had been dismissed, discouraged, or ignored until they found programs that recognized their potential. On the final evening, during a private dinner for program leaders and major donors, David Thompson stood to address the group. "4 years ago, I thought my life was over," he began, his voice thick with emotion. "I was successful in business, but I had lost my wife, lost my purpose, lost my will to keep going. Then a little girl named Grace Rodriguez knelt down on a cold sidewalk and saved my life. He looked directly at Grace, who was seated at the head table with other program graduates who had been selected for early admission to prestigious pre-med programs. But saving my life was just the beginning. Grace, you've helped us create something that I believe will change the face of medicine forever. You've shown us that extraordinary children can do extraordinary things when we give them extraordinary opportunities. David paused, reaching into his jacket pocket. Which brings me to an announcement that I've been waiting to make for several months. The room fell silent with anticipation. The Sofia Rodriguez Foundation is committing $150 million to establish youth medical education programs in all 50 states within the next 5 years. We're going to make sure that no child with Grace's gifts ever again has to study alone from library books. The room erupted in applause, but David held up his hand for silence. There's one more thing. Grace, would you come up here for a moment? Grace approached the podium, curious and slightly nervous about what David might say next. Grace Rodriguez, David said formally, by order of the Sofia Rodriguez Foundation Board of Directors, you are hereby appointed as the youngest ever youth ambassador for medical education. Your job will be to travel the country identifying gifted children, inspiring young people to pursue medicine, and ensuring that every child with a medical calling gets the chance to answer it. Grace stared at David in shock. You mean I get to help find other kids like me? You get to help build an army of young healers, David replied, just like your mother would have wanted. As Grace accepted the appointment, surrounded by applause from hundreds of medical professionals and educators who had witnessed her journey from street vendor to national leader, she thought about Sofia Rodriguez and the legacy that was growing far beyond anything her mother could have imagined. The little girl who had once been ignored and dismissed for claiming to be a doctor was now in a position to ensure that no other gifted child would face the same barriers. But Grace's greatest challenge and her greatest triumph was still to come. The foundation's expansion would soon attract international attention, leading to an invitation that would test everything she had learned about medicine, leadership, and the power of believing in impossible dreams. The world was about to discover that Grace Rodriguez was just getting started. Chapter 11. International Mission. 5 years after that life-changing morning on Newbury Street, 12-year-old Grace Rodriguez stood in the emergency room of Children's Hospital of Philadelphia, facing the most important moment of her young career. The call had come at 3 a.m. A massive earthquake had struck Haiti, and a medical emergency team was being assembled. They needed someone who could communicate with frightened children in Spanish, someone who understood pediatric trauma protocols, someone who could work efficiently in chaotic conditions. They needed Grace Rodriguez. Grace, are you absolutely certain about this? Dr. Foster asked over the satellite phone connection from Boston. This isn't a simulation or a controlled environment. This is a real disaster zone with real dangers. Doctor Foster, Mama always said that the moment you become a doctor isn't when you get your diploma. It's when you first choose to carry someone else's pain, Grace replied, checking her medical kit one final time. I've been preparing for this moment my entire life. David Thompson, now serving as chairman of the Global Youth Medical Initiative, watched Grace with a mixture of pride and concern. Over the years, she had become the daughter he never had, while he had become the father figure she desperately needed. Their bond, forged in tragedy and strengthened through purpose, had created something beautiful, a family built on shared mission rather than shared blood. The conditions will be difficult, warned Dr. Maria Santos, the team leader who had specifically requested Grace for the mission. Limited supplies, language barriers, traumatized children who may not trust adults in medical uniforms. That's exactly why you need me, Grace said with quiet confidence. Children trust other children, and sometimes the best medicine is simply showing someone that they're not alone. 6 hours later, Grace found herself in a makeshift medical tent in Port-au-Prince, surrounded by chaos that would have overwhelmed most adults. Buildings had collapsed, families were separated, and injured children were arriving in a steady stream. But as Grace began moving through the tent, something remarkable happened. "Hola, mi nombre es Grace," she said gently to a terrified 6-year-old boy with a broken arm. The little boy's eyes widened with surprise and relief. Here was someone who looked like his sister, spoke his language, and somehow understood exactly how scared he was. "¿Cómo te llamas?" Grace asked softly. "Miguel," the boy whispered. "Muy bien, Miguel. Voy a cuidarte," Grace replied, carefully examining his arm. "Todo va a estar bien." Word spread quickly through the refugee camp that there was a young doctor who could speak to the children in their own language, not just Spanish, but the universal language of childhood itself. Soon, Grace had a line of young patients who had refused treatment from adult medical workers, but willingly accepted care from someone who was like them. Dr. Santos watched in amazement as Grace worked. "She's not just treating their injuries," she observed to her colleague. "She's healing their fear." "Dr. Grace," called out Carmen, a 9-year-old girl with severe dehydration. "¿Dónde está mi mamá? La necesito encontrar." Grace knelt beside Carmen's stretcher, taking her small hand. "Carmen, hay muchas personas buscando familias perdidas, pero ahora mi trabajo es asegurarme de que estés fuerte y saludable para cuando tu mamá te encuentre. ¿Puedes ayudarme con eso?" Carmen nodded solemnly, finally accepting the IV fluids that adult medical workers had been trying to administer for hours. As the day progressed, Grace found herself at the center of an impromptu pediatric emergency unit, coordinating care for dozens of children while teaching local volunteers basic medical techniques. Her fluency in Spanish, combined with her medical knowledge and natural ability to connect with frightened children, made her invaluable to the relief effort. "Grace," Dr. Santos called out during a brief lull, "we've just received word that CNN International wants to interview you about the work you're doing here. The whole world is watching this relief effort right now." "Right now?" Grace asked, looking around at the children who still needed care. This could help the entire youth medical program gain international recognition. Grace hesitated, then looked at the faces around her. Children who had lost everything but had found comfort in the care of someone who understood their world. "Dr. Santos, tell CNN that if they want to interview me, they can do it here while I work. But I'm not leaving these kids for a photo opportunity." The interview that followed, broadcast live to millions of viewers worldwide, would become one of the most powerful pieces of television journalism ever recorded. Viewers watched as Grace Rodriguez, fluent in both medical terminology and childhood trauma, explained complex emergency procedures, while simultaneously comforting a crying toddler and teaching a local volunteer how to properly clean wounds. "Grace," the CNN reporter asked, "you're only 12 years old. How do you handle the emotional weight of seeing so much suffering?" Grace looked directly into the camera, holding the hand of a young boy who had been injured in the earthquake. "My mama taught me that being a doctor means carrying other people's pain until you can help them heal. These children aren't just patients to me, they're my brothers and sisters. When you love someone, taking care of them isn't a burden, it's a privilege." Back in Boston, David Thompson watched the broadcast with tears streaming down his face. Dr. Foster sat beside him, equally moved by what they were witnessing. "Rachel," David whispered, "look what we created. Look what Sophia's daughter has become." "Not just Sophia's daughter," Dr. Foster replied softly. "She's all of our daughter now, and she's showing the world what's possible when we believe in young people instead of limiting them." The interview sparked an international movement. Within weeks, applications for youth medical programs poured in from 45 countries. Grace had become not just a symbol of young achievement, but proof that medicine's future lay in nurturing gifts wherever they appeared, regardless of age or circumstance. 6 months later, Grace returned to Boston as the youngest person ever to address the World Health Organization. Standing before delegates from 194 countries, she spoke with the authority of someone who had proven herself in the most challenging circumstances imaginable. 5 years ago, I was a little girl selling candy on the street, dreaming of becoming a doctor like my mama, Grace began. Today, I stand before you not as an exception, but as an example of what's possible when we stop limiting children and start empowering them. She paused, looking out at the assembly of world leaders and medical professionals. My mama, Dr. Sofia Rodriguez, died believing that knowledge and compassion could change the world. She was right, but she couldn't have imagined that her dream would grow into a global movement that has now trained over 6,000 young medical professionals in 72 countries. The standing ovation lasted 8 minutes. As Grace concluded her address, she thought about that cold December morning when she had knelt beside David Thompson on a Boston sidewalk. She thought about her mother's hands teaching her to check a pulse, about David's determination to honor Sophia's memory, about Dr. Foster's willingness to believe in impossible dreams. The future of medicine isn't just being written by those of us in this room, Grace said in closing. It's being written by every gifted child who dreams of healing others. Our job isn't to protect them from that dream. It's to give them the tools to make it reality. That evening, at a private dinner celebrating the global expansion of youth medical programs, Grace found herself alone with David for a few moments. Mama would be proud, wouldn't she? Grace asked quietly. David pulled her into a hug that felt like coming home. Grace, your mama started something beautiful when she saved lives in her emergency room, but you've turned it into something extraordinary. You've proven that healing doesn't have an age limit, that compassion doesn't require a diploma, and that sometimes the smallest hands can carry the biggest dreams. As Grace looked around the room filled with young doctors in training from around the world, she understood finally that this was never really about her. It was about every child who had ever been told they were too young to make a difference, every dream that had been dismissed as impossible, every gift that had been overlooked because it came in an unexpected package. The little girl who had once cried over her mother's medical textbooks had become the young woman who would ensure that no other child with healing hands would ever have to learn alone. Chapter 12. The Global Impact. 2 years after her address to the World Health Organization, 14-year-old Grace Rodriguez stood in the newly constructed International Center for Youth Medical Education in Geneva, Switzerland. The facility, funded by a consortium of governments and private donors led by David Thompson, served as the global headquarters for what had become the largest educational revolution in medical history. Dr. Rodriguez, said Dr. Yuki Tanaka, the center's director and former head of pediatric surgery at Tokyo General. The ministers of health from 47 countries are waiting for your presentation. Grace adjusted the small lapel pin that bore her mother's photograph, a reminder she wore to every important meeting. At 14, she had already completed coursework equivalent to a pre-med degree, published 3 papers in medical journals, and supervised the training of over 200 young medical professionals worldwide. I'm ready, Dr. Tanaka, Grace replied, picking up her tablet containing the presentation that would determine the future of youth medical education globally. The assembly hall was filled with government officials, medical leaders, and representatives from international humanitarian organizations. At the center of their discussion was the Rodriguez Protocol, a comprehensive framework for identifying, training, and deploying young medical professionals in crisis situations. Honorable ministers, Grace began, her voice carrying the confidence of someone who had earned her place through extraordinary achievement rather than age or appointment. 3 months ago, our youth medical teams responded to the flooding in Bangladesh. 15 young doctors, ages 11 to 16, working alongside adult supervisors, treated over 2,000 patients and established vaccination protocols that prevented a cholera outbreak. She clicked to the next slide, showing photographs of young medical professionals at work in the field. 2 weeks ago, Our team in Syria helped establish the first pediatric trauma unit in Aleppo in 3 years. The lead surgeon was 16-year-old Ahmed Hassan, who had been training in our program since age 9. The ministers listened in respectful silence as Grace presented case study after case study of young medical professionals making significant contributions to global health initiatives. But perhaps most importantly, Grace continued, we've proven that age is not a barrier to medical excellence when proper training and supervision are provided. Our graduates consistently outperform traditionally educated medical students by an average of 23% on standardized examinations. Dr. Marie Dubois, France's Minister of Health, raised her hand. Dr. Rodriguez, while these results are impressive, there are still concerns about the psychological impact of exposing children to traumatic medical situations. Grace had anticipated this question. Dr. Dubois, I understand those concerns because I've lived with them, but our longitudinal psychological studies show that children in our programs actually demonstrate greater emotional resilience and lower rates of burnout compared to traditional medical students. When you train someone from childhood to carry others' pain constructively, they develop healthier coping mechanisms. She paused, looking around the room. Moreover, we're not creating child soldiers for medicine. We're nurturing young healers who understand from the beginning that medicine is about service, not just profession. Dr. James Morrison, representing the United Kingdom, leaned forward. What safeguards exist to prevent exploitation of these young people? Every participant undergoes quarterly psychological evaluations, Grace replied promptly. We maintain strict child-to-adult supervision ratios, and no participant under 16 is ever placed in a situation without direct adult oversight. Additionally, every child has the right to withdraw from the program at any time without penalty. And what about your own experience, Dr. Rodriguez? Asked Dr. Liu Wei from China. Do you ever regret missing a traditional childhood? Grace smiled, an expression that held both wisdom and genuine happiness. Dr. Liu, I didn't miss my childhood. I spent it preparing to save lives. While other children were playing games, I was learning to heal. While they were watching cartoons, I was studying anatomy. The difference is that my childhood had purpose. She clicked to a final slide, showing a photograph of herself at age 7, kneeling beside David Thompson on that snowy Boston street. This is where it all began. A scared little girl who knew enough to help when no one else would. That moment taught me that knowledge without action is meaningless and that age is irrelevant when someone's life is at stake. The room erupted in applause, but Grace raised her hand for silence. I want to end with a request, she said. The Sofia Rodriguez Foundation is proposing the establishment of the Global Youth Medical Corps, an international organization that would coordinate young medical professionals for humanitarian missions worldwide. We're not asking for money. We're asking for recognition, for standardized protocols, and for the right to serve humanity regardless of our age. Dr. Tanaka stepped forward. Ministers, you have before you a proposal that could revolutionize emergency medical response globally. These young doctors have already proven their capabilities. The question is whether we're brave enough to officially recognize their contributions. One by one, the ministers began nodding their agreement. By the end of the session, 45 of the 47 countries represented had committed to supporting the Global Youth Medical Corps. That evening, as Grace walked through the streets of Geneva, she received a video call from David Thompson in Boston. Grace, I just heard the news, David said, his face beaming with pride on the screen. The Global Youth Medical Corps is officially recognized by the World Health Organization. You did it. We did it, Grace corrected. This started with you believing in a scared little girl on a sidewalk. No, David replied softly. This started with your mother believing that knowledge and compassion could change the world. You've just proven her right on a scale she never could have imagined. As Grace ended the call and looked up at the stars over Geneva, She thought about all the young medical professionals around the world who would now have official recognition for their contributions. Children who, like her, had been told they were too young to make a difference, but who had refused to accept those limitations. Chapter 13. The Next Generation. 5 years later, 19-year-old Dr. Grace Rodriguez stood in the Harvard Medical School lecture hall, where she had just become the youngest person ever to receive an honorary Doctor of Medicine degree. Her actual medical degree, earned through an accelerated program that recognized her extraordinary background, had been conferred 2 years earlier. But today was different. Today, she was addressing the next generation of traditional medical students as someone who had revolutionized how the world thought about medical education. "When I was 7 years old," Grace began, looking out at the 180 first-year medical students before her, "I saved a man's life on a street corner in Boston, not because I was trying to prove anything, but because someone needed help and I had the knowledge to provide it." In the front row sat David Thompson, now 61, but still serving as chairman of the Sophia Rodriguez Foundation. Beside him was Dr. Foster, who had been promoted to Dean of Revolutionary Medical Education at Harvard. Both watched with the pride of surrogate parents as Grace shared her story with students who were just beginning their medical journeys. Today, the Global Youth Medical Corps has over 15,000 active members across 89 countries, Grace continued. Last year alone, our young medical professionals provided care to 2.3 million patients, prevented 47 disease outbreaks, and pioneered 23 new treatment protocols. She clicked to a slide showing photographs of young doctors at work around the world. But perhaps most importantly, we've proven that medicine is not about age, credentials, or traditional pathways. It's about competence, compassion, and the courage to act when others need help. A student in the third row raised her hand. "Dr. Rodriguez, how do you respond to critics who still argue that children shouldn't be involved in medical practice?" Grace smiled, remembering similar questions from years past. "I respond with results. Our program graduates have lower malpractice rates, higher patient satisfaction scores, and better long-term outcomes than traditionally trained physicians. When you train someone from childhood to see medicine as service rather than just career, they develop different priorities." Another student called out, "What advice would you give to those of us just starting medical school?" "Remember why you're here," Grace replied immediately. "Not for the prestige, not for the money, but because you want to help people heal. That calling doesn't have an age requirement. It just requires dedication to putting others' needs before your own." After the lecture, Grace found herself in Dr. Foster's office, looking out at the campus where traditional and revolutionary medical education now coexisted. "Rachel," Grace said, using the informal address that had developed over their years of collaboration, "do you think Mama would be proud of what we've built?" Dr. Foster looked at the young woman who had transformed from a frightened child selling candy to an internationally recognized leader in medical education. "Grace, your mother planted a seed when she taught you that knowledge without action is selfishness. You've grown that seed into a forest that's changing how the world approaches healing. There's something I want to tell you," Grace said, turning from the window. "The foundation has approved my proposal for the next phase." Dr. Foster raised her eyebrows with interest. "We're establishing the Sophia Rodriguez Institute for Medical Innovation," Grace continued, "a research facility dedicated to developing new approaches to medical education and emergency response. But this time we're not just training young doctors, we're training young medical researchers, engineers, and innovators." "Grace, that's incredible. Where will you locate it?" "Boston," Grace replied with a smile. "Right across the street from where Mr. Thompson collapsed that morning. I want every young person who walks through our doors to remember that medicine begins with a willingness to help when others won't." 6 months later, Grace stood before the newly constructed Sophia Rodriguez Institute, watching as the first class of young medical innovators, children aged 8 to 16 from around the world, arrived for their orientation. Among them was 8-year-old Marcus Chen from San Francisco, who had designed a new method for early detection of diabetes. 10-year-old Amara Okafor from Nigeria had developed a water purification system that prevented cholera outbreaks. 12-year-old Isabella Petrov from Russia had created a new surgical technique that reduced recovery time for pediatric heart surgery by 40%. "Welcome to the Sofia Rodriguez Institute," Grace addressed the group. "You are here not because you are children with interesting ideas, but because you are young innovators whose work can save lives. Age is not a limitation here. It's an advantage." She paused, looking at their eager faces. "My mother used to say that our gifts don't belong to us. They belong to the people we're meant to help. Today, you begin learning how to use your gifts to change the world." David Thompson, now serving as the Institute's chairman, watched from the side of the room as Grace continued her orientation. In the 19 years since that December morning when she had saved his life, she had transformed from a frightened child into a leader whose influence extended across continents. But more than that, she had proven that extraordinary gifts, when properly nurtured, could indeed change the world. Epilogue. The legacy continues. 25 years after that fateful December morning on Newbury Street, Dr. Grace Rodriguez, now 32 and serving as Director General of the World Health Organization's Youth Medical Division, stood in her office overlooking Boston Harbor. The same harbor David Thompson had once viewed from his penthouse before a heart attack changed both their lives forever. On her desk sat 2 photographs, one of her mother, Dr. Sofia Rodriguez, in her white coat at Children's Hospital, and another of herself at age 7, kneeling beside David Thompson on that snowy sidewalk. Between them lay a letter that had arrived that morning from the Nobel Committee. The Sofia Rodriguez Global Medical Initiative had been awarded the Nobel Peace Prize for its contributions to international health and humanitarian aid. It was the first time in history that an organization founded by a child had received such recognition. Grace's phone buzzed with a video call from David, now 77 but still sharp and engaged as chairman emeritus of the foundation. "Grace, have you seen the news?" David asked, his face filled with the same pride she had seen countless times over the years. "I've seen it," Grace replied, holding up the Nobel Committee letter. "I keep thinking about what Mama would say. She'd say that knowledge without action is just selfishness," David replied, echoing the words that had guided Grace's entire career. "And you've proven that the opposite is also true, that action with knowledge can heal the world." Grace looked out at the harbor, where she could see young medical professionals from the Institute boarding a ship bound for disaster relief in the Philippines. Among them was 16-year-old Dr. Samuel Kim, who had been accepted into the program at age 9 and was now leading his own research team. "David, do you ever wonder what would have happened if I hadn't been on that corner that morning?" David was quiet for a moment. "I think about it sometimes. But then I remember that it wasn't chance that put you there. It was your mother's teaching, your own dedication, and a universe that has a way of putting the right people in the right place at exactly the right time." "The acceptance speech is next month in Stockholm," Grace said. "I want you to give it with me. Grace, this is your moment. You've earned this recognition." "We earned it," Grace replied firmly. "This started with a businessman who was willing to believe in a child's impossible dream. I'm not accepting this prize without you." As the call ended, Grace turned back to her desk, where a stack of applications waited for review. Children from around the world who wanted to join the program, each one carrying their own impossible dream of healing others. At the top of the stack was an application from 7-year-old Maria Santos from Mexico City, who had performed CPR on her grandmother and saved her life. Attached was a drawing of herself in a white coat with the words, "I want to be a doctor like Dr. Grace," written in careful script. Grace smiled, remembering her own childhood dreams and the adults who had been brave enough to believe in them. She reached for her pen to approve Maria's application, knowing that somewhere in that child's future lay discoveries and innovations that would help heal a world that still desperately needed healing. The little girl, who had once knelt on a cold sidewalk to save a stranger's life, had grown into a woman whose influence spanned continents. But more importantly, she had created a legacy that would continue long after she was gone. A world where extraordinary gifts were nurtured regardless of age, where knowledge was always paired with action, and where the youngest hands could carry the biggest dream. Dr. Sofia Rodriguez had been right all along. Knowledge and compassion could change the world. Her daughter had simply proven it on a scale no one had ever imagined possible. And in hospitals, clinics, and disaster zones around the globe, young medical professionals continued their work, carrying forward the lesson that had started it all, that being a doctor isn't about age or credentials. It's about having the knowledge to help and the courage to act when someone needs healing. The dream that began with a mother's love and a child's determination had become humanity's hope for a healthier, more compassionate future. And it was just the beginning. The end.